Mr. Musk's SpaceX company. And the Wall Street Journal issued a story, I think around February 7th, that talked about statements that Mr. Elez had made in the prior year. One was, you could not pay me to marry outside my ethnicity. Another was that he wanted to normalize Indian hate. The third was, just for the record, I was racist before it was cool. And another was, I just want a eugenic immigration policy. Is that too much to ask? This man resigned shortly after that article was published, but you don't recall him being there?
Congressman, I did not recall that individual's name, but that individual was terminated.
He was terminated, okay. Well, I appreciate that, although it appears that—
Watch what's happening right here, right now, because what you just witnessed is the architecture of authoritarian kleptocracy being constructed in real time through the testimony of evasion and the spectacle of Congressman Glenn Ivey refusing to let them get away with it. And this is the moment where we understand with crystalline clarity that the Trump administration has invited self-described racists who literally bragged about wanting eugenic immigration policies to access the payment systems controlling $6 trillion of American money, while the officials under oath pretend they can't remember his name, even though they fired him and then rehired him somewhere else, and the vice president and the president himself publicly defended him and said he deserves a second chance, because apparently when you openly advocate for normalizing hatred against an entire ethnic group, when your wife happens to be from that ethnic group, you're just a kid making mistakes, but when you're a federal worker trying to do your job with integrity, you get purged without ceremony or explanation. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night, because the man we're talking about had access to Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service payment systems that cut more than $5 trillion in checks for the federal government each year. These payment files include Social Security numbers, addresses, bank account information for tens of millions of Social Security recipients and Medicare providers, and we're supposed to believe that nobody remembers who he was when confronted in congressional testimony, even though they terminated him. Let me walk you through the sheer audacity of what Representative Ivey exposed in that hearing, because this is a masterclass in holding power accountable when power has decided accountability is for losers and the little people. The individual in question posted statements including, "You could not pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity," wanted to normalize Indian hate, wrote "just for the record I was racist before it was cool," and advocated for eugenic immigration policy, and these weren't ancient history dug up from some teenage MySpace account. These posts came after Vance had been nominated as Trump's running mate. Which means this 25-year-old was posting this vile hatred while working for Musk's companies, knowing full well that the vice presidential candidate was married to an Indian American woman, and thinking, yeah, this is fine, this is my brand. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that position is staggering. But what's even more staggering is what happened next, because when the Wall Street Journal exposed Marco Elez and his racist proclamation, Elon Musk announced he would rehire him after Vice President J.D. Vance urged Musk to hire the staffer back, and President Donald Trump endorsed the view, and suddenly we're in a universe where the sitting Vice President of the United States, whose children are half Indian American, is out here on social media saying he doesn't think stupid social media activity should ruin a kid's life, as if advocating for ethnic hatred and eugenics is equivalent to posting a cringy selfie or having a bad take about a Marvel movie. Think about the intellectual and moral gymnastics required to occupy that position for even a moment, because Vance told Congressman Ro Khanna, who is Indian American, to grow up, and said racist trolls on the internet, while offensive "don't threaten my kids," you know what does, a culture that denies grace to people who make mistakes, a culture that encourages congressmen to act like whiny children. So the vice president's position is that actual racism is less threatening to his children than a culture of accountability. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the ideological foundation of everything they're building. This is the permission structure for the normalization of hatred that's happening across every level of government right now. In just a few weeks, it has become more acceptable for people to be openly racist at a level we have not seen in decades. And that's not hyperbole. That's from scholars and analysts who track this stuff professionally, because Trump and his staffers are undermining the social norms against racism, with appointees like Darren Beattie, who tweeted that competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work, after the Doge staffer was linked to posts saying I was racist before it was cool, and normalize Indian hate. Vice President J.D. Vance defended the staffer and said he should be rehired. But here's where it gets even more sinister. And this is what Congressman Ivey was drilling down on in that hearing, because the official can't recall the individual's name, even though he admits the man was terminated, and then Ivey presses him about how this racist somehow kept doing federal work through other agencies, and the witness offers nothing but evasion and convenient memory gaps. This is the playbook, people. This is how authoritarianism functions in practice, because you create a maze of deniability where nobody is ever responsible for anything, and everyone can just claim they don't recall when confronted with documentary evidence of their malfeasance, and meanwhile, Elez has reportedly been reinstated at the Social Security Administration as of February 21st, from which position he could have access to extensive personal data for most American. So the man who wants eugenic immigration policy now has his hands on the data systems that could theoretically be used to implement exactly that kind of discriminatory horror. Do you see how this works? Do you understand the architecture of what they're constructing? And I need you to understand the broader context here, because Doge itself is claiming to have saved hundreds of billions, although other government entities estimated it cost the government $21.7 billion, and another analysis estimated Doge cuts will cost taxpayers $135 billion, with the IRS predicting more than $500 billion in revenue loss due to Doge-driven cuts. So this isn't about efficiency or fraud prevention, it's about creating chaos and dismantling the administrative state while enriching Musk and his allies. One review estimates that more than 635,000 people have already died due to USAID cuts, with more than two-thirds of them children, and each person dead because of Musk's team of Nazi-curious, blatantly racist computer programmers will leave behind loved ones wrecked by the loss, and those are human beings with names and families and futures that have been extinguished so that Elon Musk can play government efficiency on hard mode while appointing white supremacists to positions of extraordinary power. Representative Ivey knows this, which is why he's not letting them off the hook with their I don't recall routine, because the approach of the Trump administration and Musk and his Doge team has been awful and frankly not intended on getting waste, fraud, and abuse, but has been a frontal attack on government workers aimed at forcing as many of them out of their jobs as possible. And the congressman understands that agencies are not returning calls even from members of Congress and contractors who've already delivered services, haven't been paid in months, and are having to lay off workers just because they can't afford to keep floating the bill for Uncle Sam. So this is economic devastation rippling through communities while racist 25-year-olds get handed the keys to our nation's financial infrastructure. The cruelty is the point. But so is the corruption, because when you destabilize every system of accountability, you create opportunities for looting on an unprecedented scale, and that's what we're watching unfold. Let me take you deeper into the specific mechanics of what happened with Treasury access, because this is where the authoritarian rubber meets the democratic road, and it's terrifying. Reports emerged that senior civil servants were resisting Doge requests for access to Bureau of Fiscal Service payment systems, and in the days since officials affiliated with Doge were granted certain access to BFS systems, for the first time in decades, the Secretary of the Treasury delegated responsibilities for overseeing payment systems to a political official rather than a nonpartisan career civil servant, while that political official maintains his role as a private company CEO, so you have the fox guarding the henhouse while also running a competing chicken farm, and somehow we're all supposed to pretend this is normal governance. Access was gained after what several news organizations characterized as a refusal by high-ranking Treasury official David Lebrick, a 30-year veteran, to provide that access, and he has since retired from that post, which is a sanitized way of saying a career public servant was forced out because he wouldn't hand over the financial data of every American to Elon Musk's personal cadre of tech bros and explicit racists. A federal judge from the Southern District of New York issued a preliminary injunction against Doge's access to Treasury payment systems, stating access was provided in a chaotic and haphazard manner, and it prevents anyone affiliated with Doge from accessing federal payment systems, and the judge wrote that the process by which the Treasury Dog team was appointed, brought on board and provided with access, could have been implemented in a measured, reasonable, and thoughtful way, but to date, based on the record, it does not appear this has been the case, which is judicial speak, for this is a dumpster fire of constitutional proportions. And what access are we talking about exactly? Because the Trump administration agreed to limitation that 2 Treasury employees have read-only access and won't share it with others working with Dog. But reports indicate Elez had read-write access to the Treasury payment system, and it now appears he had that access for several days, reportedly executing changes to the code. So when they say read-only, they mean read-write, and when they say limited, they mean extensive, and when they say oversight, they mean none whatsoever. This is gaslighting at the governmental level, and it's why Congressman Ivey's questioning matters so much, because he's creating a record of their lies and evasions that can be used in future accountability proceedings, assuming we still have those. The official in that clip admits the individual was terminated, but claims not to recall him, even though Vance replied to a Musk poll, saying Ellis should rejoin Doge, writing, "I obviously disagree with some of Ellis's posts, but I don't think stupid social media activity should ruin a kid's life." And Trump, when asked about it, said, "Well, I don't know about the particular thing, but if the vice president said that, did you say that I'm with the vice president?" So the president and vice president both went on record supporting this guy, but the Treasury official can't recall his name or his access or anything else. That's not a memory problem, that's a perjury-adjacent performance designed to insulate the administration from accountability. Now I want to zoom out to the ideological architecture undergirding all of this, because we're not just talking about one racist staff member or one compromised payment system, we're talking about a comprehensive assault on the very concept of multiracial democracy. This degrading rhetoric is not new, but increasingly prominent from the political right, and with Trump aggressively cracking down on nearly every type of immigration, some members of the MAGA coalition are openly suggesting that only white Christians belong in America, and researchers have documented this extensively because the Center for the Study of Organized Hate recorded nearly 2,700 posts promoting racism and xenophobia against Indians and Indian Americans in October alone, and at least some of that might be explained by Elon Musk's transformation of X, since he took over racist content that would previously have been policed by content moderators, is now amplified and encouraged, so the same billionaire who gave the self-described racist access to Treasury is also running the social media platform where racist organizing against his vice president's ethnic community is flourishing. You cannot make this up, it's too perfectly dystopian, and the thing that should terrify every single person regardless of political affiliation is that this is happening in plain sight with officials openly defending it while lying about the details, because what Vance frames as a call for mercy is in reality a declaration of amnesty for bigotry. And while second chances and rehabilitation are good things, Vance does not articulate why this specific person should get that treatment, nor mention any other means for accountability, so there's no apology, no accountability, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, someone who thinks eugenic immigration policy is reasonable shouldn't have access to the databases that could facilitate exactly that. Instead, we get this pseudo-philosophical nonsense about cancel culture and grace that conveniently only ever seems to apply when the person being canceled is on their ideological team, because I guarantee you if a progressive staffer had posted normalize white hate or advocated for race-based exclusion, they'd be crucified and blacklisted for life without a single voice from the Trump administration coming to their defense. This combination of discriminatory rhetoric and policies from the top of the federal government is normalizing hatred and harassment, and a right-wing group has published a DEI watch list targeting federal workers, including names, titles, and photos, and on the heels of already spiking hate crimes, we are seeing new mobilization of old-school racist organizations, including the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazi Goyim Defense League. So this isn't abstract, this is lives being destroyed and communities being terrorized, because the people at the top have decided that white grievance politics is their ticket to permanent power. And when you combine that with Trump purging Democratic commissioners of the NLRB and EEOC, as well as Department of Justice and FBI staff, you have a systematic dismantling of every institutional barrier to authoritarian rule and the replacement of career professionals with loyalists and ideologues who will do whatever they're told, regardless of legality or decency. Congressman Ivey understands what's at stake, which is why he's pressing so hard on these details, because details matter, and memory matters, and accountability matters when you're trying to preserve democratic governance against an onslaught of bad faith actors who view government as a vehicle for personal enrichment and ideological domination. When that official claims he doesn't recall Marco Ellis, even though the man was terminated and then mysteriously kept getting federal work, he's not having a senior moment, he's executing a strategy of plausible deniability that allows the administration to do whatever it wants while maintaining the fiction that processes and procedures are being followed. It's the banality of evil, updated for the social media age, where the architects of oppression present themselves as misunderstood reformers, being persecuted by mean journalists and accountability-minded legislators. And here's what makes me absolutely furious about the cancel culture framing that Vance deployed, because Vance said we shouldn't reward journalists who try to destroy people ever, so I say bring him back, which reframes investigative journalism exposing racism in government as the real villain in this story, rather than the actual racism or the actual security breach of putting an unvetted extremist in control of sensitive financial systems. This is classic authoritarian rhetoric, straight out of Orwell, where reporting becomes destroying, and accountability becomes persecution, and standards become cancellation, because the goal is to eliminate any external check on executive power by delegitimizing the very concept of holding power accountable. If journalists are villains for reporting facts, then there's no legitimate way to challenge whatever the administration wants to do, which is exactly the point. We need to talk about the specific ideological lineage of eugenic immigration policy, because when Marco Elez says he just wants a eugenic immigration policy, is that too much to ask? He's not engaging in ironic edgelord posting, he's articulating a worldview with deep roots in white supremacist thought that led directly to the Holocaust and the forced sterilization programs across the United States in the 20th century. Eugenics is the pseudo-scientific belief that you can improve the human population through selective breeding and controlled reproduction, and when applied to immigration policy, it means selecting people based on their perceived genetic or racial superiority, which is literal Nazi ideology. This isn't ancient history either, because powerful figures in Trump's movement, including Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, were referencing the 1970s novel The Camp of the Saints as a cautionary tale which is a favorite of white supremacists, where a fleet of Indian migrants led by a pestis-eating farmer invades France and overthrows the Western world. So the ideological architecture for exactly this kind of racist immigration framework has been circulating in Trump world for years. And Congressman Ivey is fighting against all of this by simply insisting that officials answer basic questions about who had access to what, when, and why, because in a functional democracy those should be easy questions to answer. But we're not in a functional democracy anymore. We're in a managed democratic facade where the forms are maintained, but the substance has been hollowed out and replaced with loyalty oaths and ideological litmus tests, and a willingness to look the other way when your colleagues advocate for ethnic cleansing, as long as they're on the team. This is how democracies die in the 21st century, not with tanks in the streets but with 30-year Treasury veterans being forced into retirement, so that tech billionaires and their racist minions can access financial systems without oversight, while officials testify under oath that they just can't seem to remember any of the relevant details. The through line connecting all of this is the conviction held by Trump and Musk and their enablers that rules are for other people and that power is its own justification, and that if you're sufficiently wealthy or sufficiently connected, you can literally brag about being racist before it was cool and still get hired and fired and rehired with the explicit endorsement of the president and vice president. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Bloomberg that he personally vetted one of the 2 Treasury employees from Musk's Doge team, calling them highly trained professionals, and saying this is not some roving band running around doing things, but that's exactly what they are. They're a roving band of ideological zealots and tech bros and self-described racists running around doing whatever they want with sensitive government data, while the officials who are supposed to provide oversight either resign in protest or develop sudden convenient amnesia when questioned under oath. Representative Ivey is doing the essential work of democracy by creating a record by asking questions, by refusing to accept non-answers, but he can't do it alone, and this is where we come in, because if we don't raise hell about this, if we don't demand accountability, if we don't make absolutely clear that this is unacceptable, then it becomes normalized, and once it's normalized, it becomes impossible to reverse. The Trump administration is testing what they can get away with, and so far the answer is pretty much everything, because as critics highlight legal and ethical issues surrounding Doge's seemingly unchecked pursuit of government austerity, Democrats in Congress run into obstacles with a Democratic-led attempt to subpoena Musk about conflicts of interest blocked by Republicans, so even the basic oversight tools that Congress possesses are being neutered by partisan Republican protection of an administration that views the Constitution as an obstacle rather than a framework. What we're witnessing in that clip is a microcosm of the entire crisis facing American democracy, because you have a congressman from Maryland representing his constituents, trying to extract basic information about who had access to $6 trillion in federal payment systems, and the official walls and evades and claims memory lapses, even though we have public statements from Trump and Vance defending this individual. The disrespect for Congress as an institution, the contempt for oversight, the assumption that they can just lie or dodge and face no consequences, this is the mindset of people who believe they've already won, and that democratic accountability is a quaint relic they can safely ignore, and maybe they're right. Maybe they have won. Maybe we're too exhausted or too distracted or too divided to mount effective resistance. But I refuse to accept that, because the alternative is watching everything that generations fought for be dismantled by grifters and bigots who see government as a piggy bank and the American people as marks to be fleeced. Racist tweets are racist regardless of how ironic they appear to be or how young the person who wrote them is, especially when they have a job that impacts millions of people, and this is such a basic principle that it shouldn't need stating. But apparently it does, because we're living through a moment where the Vice President of the United States thinks calling someone out for advocating ethnic hatred is worse than actually advocating ethnic hatred. The moral inversion required to maintain that position is staggering, and it tells you everything you need to know about the values animating this administration, because they will defend literally anyone, no matter how vile, as long as that person advances their agenda of dismantling democratic institutions, consolidating power in the hands of a wealthy white nationalist elite. And I want to be absolutely clear about what Congressman Ivey accomplished in that hearing, because by getting the official to admit on the record that the individual was terminated while also claiming not to recall who he was, Ivey created a documented contradiction that can be used in future oversight investigations and potential legal proceedings. This is how you build a case against an administration that operates in bad faith, by accumulating evidence of their lies and their evasions until the weight of documentation becomes impossible to ignore. It's painstaking work, and it's often frustrating because you're dealing with people who have no shame and no commitment to truth, but it's essential because without a record, there's no accountability, and without accountability, there's no democracy, just the rule of the strong over the weak, dressed up in the language of efficiency, reform. So when you watch that clip, don't just see one congressman grilling one evasive official, see the entire battle for democratic governance playing out in miniature, because that's what it is. It's a fight between people who believe in transparency and accountability and the rule of law versus people who believe in power and loyalty and the freedom to do whatever you want, as long as you're on the winning team. And right now the people who believe in power are winning because they control the executive branch, and they have enough allies in Congress to block meaningful oversight, and they have a media ecosystem that will defend or downplay or distract from every outrage no matter how egregious. But they haven't won yet, and they won't win, as long as we have people like Glenn Ivey refusing to let them off the hook, refusing to accept their non-answers, refusing to pretend that this is normal or acceptable, or anything other than a full frontal assault on everything that makes democracy possible. This is the fight of our lives, people, and it's happening right now in congressional hearings and courtrooms and agency offices across the federal government, where career professionals are being purged and replaced with ideologues, and where racist extremists are being given access to our most sensitive systems, and where officials lie under oath confident that they'll face no consequences because the people who could hold them accountable are either complicit or powerless. But powerless is a choice, and complicit is a choice, and we get to choose whether we accept this or whether we fight back with every tool at our disposal, including our voices, our votes, our capacity for moral outrage, and our refusal to let them memory hole the evidence of their corruption. Glenn Ivey is showing us how it's done. Now it's on us to follow his example and demand better, and accept nothing less than the full restoration of democratic accountability, because anything less is surrender, and surrender is not an option when the stakes are this high, and the threat is this clear, and the evidence of their malign intent is this overwhelming. This is what resistance looks like in the 21st century, not dramatic gestures, but relentless questioning, meticulous documentation, and absolute refusal to normalize the abnormal, and we better get good at it fast, because they're not slowing down, and they're not backing off, and they will take everything they can get away with taking, unless we stop them.